You can start over at any point.
Okay, well, once again, I'd like to welcome all of you to our webinar on engaging youth in mentoring programs and relationships. Just a couple quick announcements before we get started today. You're going to receive an email following the webinar that will provide you with information on how to access the slides and a recording of the webinar. And you'll also receive a link to the mentoring forums that will provide a number of resources and opportunities for you to continue the conversation on this topic. And we'll also provide a very brief survey that allows us to determine how we want to proceed with these webinars in the future. So please take the time to complete this brief survey when the webinar is finished. Well, I would like to welcome you to today's webinar. My name is Amber Troop, and I'm the Director of Mentor Michigan. And it's my pleasure to welcome you to this April webinar in the Collaborative Webinar Series. I'm one of the lead partners on today's webinar, along with Mike Geringer from the National Mentoring Center at Education Northwest and April Reardon at the Mentoring Partnership of Minnesota. We also have other partners in the webinar series that include our friends from the Indiana Mentoring Partnership, Friends for Youth, and Oregon Mentors. So we hope today's Yes?
I just said thank you. This is April.
Oh, great. So just a few updates on today's webinar. You can participate along with us. We hope that you'll participate in this webinar and that it can be somewhat interactive, and that even though we are meeting via webinar. So there's a chat box for you and a question box for you to interact with the other people on this webinar and ask questions of our fantastic panelists today. So when you do post a question, we're going to do our best to address as many questions as possible during the webinar, but also continue to monitor the question and chat box because we might post your questions there and have other participants in the webinar today respond to those as well. So once again, I'll be co-hosting today's webinar along with Mike Geringer. Our friend Celeste with the Mentoring Partnership of Oregon will be monitoring the question boxes and helping to respond to those questions. Sarah from Friends for Youth will be helping us oversee the chat panel. April will be moving our slides along and helping us stay on track with all of the great visuals that she provided. And a new feature to the webinar today will be facilitated by Ashley at the Mentoring Partnership of Minnesota, and we're going to be encouraging you to tweet during today's webinar and even after today's webinar to talk about this topic in greater detail. And you can use the hashtag MentorWebinar when you make your tweet and use Twitter to continue this conversation. So we're going to start today by just getting a sense for the folks that are on the call today and on the webinar. So we're going to launch a couple quick polls. The first poll is around your experience level, whether you consider yourself an expert, an experienced mentoring professional, or a beginner in the mentoring field. So take just a moment to respond to this brief poll. Okay, great. And April shared the results for everybody to see. Most of you consider yourself to be in the experience category, 60%. 30% of you consider yourself a beginner in the mentoring field, and 10% an expert. So regardless of your experience level, we're excited to have you joining us here today and hope that you'll have some useful information to bring back to your mentoring program. We're going to do one more quick poll, and we want to know your role within your mentoring program. Do you provide training and technical assistance? Do you consider yourself a researcher or a funder, or other? Do you not feel like you fall in one of these categories? So please take a quick moment to respond to this poll as well. Great, and here are the results from today's poll. 75% of you work in a mentoring program. We have a few of you that provide training and technical assistance, just a couple of you that fall into the research category, and a few that we didn't address in our different categories. So welcome to all of you.
Yeah, and if you are in that other category, feel free to chat, use your chat or question and answer panel to share with us who else might be joining us.
That sounds great. So during today's webinar, we're going to talk about the topic of youth engagement. And we know this means a lot of different things to different people. And in just a moment, Mike is going to kick us off with some research and background information that will help us set the stage for this topic of youth engagement. Then we're going to move to our panelists, who are experts in youth engagement on many levels, and they're going to share with you what they do and respond to some questions that we prepared for them, but then also respond to the questions that you may have. So feel free to, once again, enter those in the question box at any time. And we usually get a lot of questions once again, so if we don't ask them all live, we'll do our best to continue these conversations via the mentoring forum and or Twitter. So stay tuned, we'll do our best to address everything. We have 4 panelists today, and we want to hear from all of them. So when we're ready, we'll keep their introductions short when we get to them. And we'll provide additional information so you can find out more about them online if you're interested. And we're going to launch just one more poll about what comes to mind for you when you hear the term youth engagement. Once again, we know that this means many different things to different people. So we've provided a number of categories here. And please select the following one of the following options that connects with you the most related to the term youth engagement. And once everybody has voted and we post the results, Mike is going to take it from there and go over the poll results with you, and then jump into some background and research information.
Great, thanks, Amber. Hello, everybody. Go ahead and select one of these options. You know, when we were putting together this webinar, we wanted to start out with kind of some research and some definitions around this term, and I quickly realized that there's not a lot of agreement sometimes on what youth engagement really is or what it means to people. I see many of you have selected things like leadership opportunities, but also, not surprisingly, given our mentor program heavy audience today, a lot of you are thinking about engagement in terms of getting mentees engaged with their mentor or with the program itself. A smaller percentage of you pick things like service learning. And I think youth engagement can kind of mean all of these things. And we're certainly going to kind of focus on a mentoring specific way of looking at youth engagement today, but you know, I just want to raise that there is kind of no right answer to some of this. But April, if you could take it to the next slide here, I wanted to start off with you know, kind of a common definition that I ran into in doing some research around this. Experiences where youth are actively involved in cognitive and social endeavors that promote growth. And you know, we kind of understand what that means, but it sounds a little clinical. I like to think of youth development through a little bit more simple lens of that I think of youth development as being the act of getting young people to care about and engage their community through adults caring about and engaging the young people themselves. And I think, you know, that's a mindset that you can see in a lot of the youth engagement research out there. You know, there's kind of my alternative definition. April, on the next slide, if you could show kind of what this reciprocal nature of youth engagement looks like in practice. This comes from the Forum for Youth Investment, and they call it the double arrow of youth engagement. You have adults contributing to youth, communities involving youth in decision-making and leadership, and in turn, the youth turn around and kind of get engaged, and I don't think you can have one of these without the other. I think youth engagement is always a two-way street. Before I get too deep into this research, I want to just kind of reference the fact that I'm borrowing very heavily in some of this from the good work by Teresa Sullivan and Rebecca Sato. They're with the University of Minnesota Extension Center on youth development, and they are two of the prominent people in this field. We actually tried to get both of them for this webinar today, but they had conflicts with other things. But later on the forums, we're going to be posting some links to, and April's got it up here on the screen. They've got a wonderful website that is just chock full of not only print resources that you can download, you know, research and white papers on this topic, but also an awful lot of video, a lot of like really cool presentations on how to think about youth engagement and how to build engagement opportunities into mentoring and other youth serving programs. So I think today we're going to talk about 3 levels of engagement. And there's kind of the biggest picture level, which is engaging youth in the community and getting them really involved in local politics, organizing around serious community or social problems. The next level down from that is getting them engaged with your program. And I think for a lot of folks, this is where they think about youth engagement. How do I get young people invested in what we're doing? Sometimes it's as simple as how do I get them to show up at my program for regularly scheduled activities. And I think for those of us in mentoring, there's kind of that more personal piece of how do I get young people engaged with their mentor. We've all read and thought a lot about, you know, the difficulty in kind of getting youth to buy into that new relationship. So, you know, we're also going to be spending some time today to talk about how to get youth engaged with a volunteer mentor. But I think the research is pretty clear, and the current thinking on youth engagement is clear, is that there is always a relationship at the heart of all engagement experiences. Even at that top big picture level, somebody, some individual is getting young people organized and getting them interested in being involved and active in making their community a better place. On the next slide, and I apologize for like the amount of text on this, but I really wanted to share this with folks. The Forum for Youth Investment has come out with this framework for thinking about youth engagement that is kind of a continuum that runs from the left-hand side here, which starts out as a very basic youth services approach that views youth as clients, and we provide services to them. And as you move towards the right, you start building upon that basic foundation by adding more and more ways in which young people are in control of their experience in your program, and then moving beyond your program, taking the changes that you make in young people and moving them towards, you know, the far right side is youth organizing, where they're building membership bases and providing a lot of governance to your program, and also getting involved in things in the community. And certainly we're going to hear from our panelists today about several real-life examples of what this looks like in action. So, you know,
can I just mention here?
It's kind of this continuum. Yeah.
Sorry, I was just going to mention this continuum is from the Forum for Youth Investment, and so if you're particularly interested in this, to know that the Minnesota Mentoring Conference in the fall on October 15th, we are bringing Karen Pittman from the Forum for Youth Investment to be a keynote speaker and presenter. So just keep that in mind.
Yeah, no, Karen is wonderful, and I'm sure she'll be able to bring a lot of clarity to some of this. So why is engagement important? And there's several kind of obvious reasons. Engaged youth have better access to supports they need, not just through your program, but also it allows them to engage additional supports outside of your program. I think at kind of a very big picture level, it helps adult and youth in a community better understand each other. And certainly, I think when we have youth engaged and organized and active in solving a community's problems, there's a lot of powerful social transformation that happens there. And as you see here on the screen, in my mind, engaged youth equals engaged citizens down the road. Unfortunately, we allow too many of our citizens in this country to kind of disengage from being involved in civic life. And so I think youth engagement is very important from that perspective. I think it's also important kind of from a broad youth development perspective. You see this lady here on the screen, Gisela Konopka. She was a really prominent youth development researcher throughout the last century. In the 70s, she developed this kind of core framework of what good youth development looks like. And as I look at these 8 items, all of them are dependent on youth engagement, on having an adult kind of engaging a young person and helping them spread their wings and grow and then do something with that personal growth. These also look a lot like what we ask mentors to do with their young people sometimes, in terms of the personal growth and development that we hope a mentor will spark in a young person. So I think in some ways you can't divorce the concept of youth engagement from quality youth development. Now there are some unfortunate things around youth engagement. We can get to the next slide here. You know, unfortunately, according to the Search Institute, almost 40% of adolescents don't score high on any of their 3 engagement scales. Certainly older youth, and many of you know this from your mentoring programs, it's much more difficult to kind of get them engaged. There's been a lot of shifts in attitudes about youth over the last 20, 30 years, where I think America is a lot more afraid of our young people than we used to be, and I think that hinders engagement. And then finally, there's been some research that really highlights some critical things that have happened in American society that has made engaging youth a lot harder. Things like, you know, the advent of television and having a lot more parents with, you know, both parents working in the household and suburban sprawl, and all of these factors have kind of made it difficult for those adult-youth relationships to form the way they did naturally kind of in the country's past. So we have to be intentional about it. And how do we do that? Well, I think the best kind of framework for thinking about that is through the work of Terry Sullivan and Rebecca Sato. They've come up with what they call the rings of engagement. And you'll see these 4 core areas of participation, passion, voice, and collective action. And you know, to me, these are the 4 cornerstones of how you get young people engaged. And you'll notice the arrow running through the middle of it is relationships. And I think, you know, relationships with adults are the things that bind these 4 principles together. I think when we get to our panelists, we're going to hear a lot more about each of these 4 pieces and how they look in action. Just quickly, I want to highlight some of what the research says around keys for engaging older youth. The Harvard Family Research Project has found that programs with these kind of 5 components here on the left tend to have higher levels of engagement. Now, these are for programs for older youth, but I think you can see, you know, that older youth really want that voice and choice, and they want to know that the program will help them in their school and their workforce readiness and finding a career. There's also some components there on the right-hand side of what quality youth engagement programs kind of tend to have as a core, as a base. Unfortunately, there's some barriers to engaging youth in your program as well. On the next slide here, the first 2 bullets here kind of go hand in hand. The research has shown that young people will say they're not aware of things and not interested, but the second they become aware of what your program's offering, they tend to be a lot more interested. I know the youth build folks we're going to talk to later can speak to that a little bit. A lot of the research has pointed to just simple logistical things like transportation issues and other out-of-school time responsibilities that the young person has, whether that's helping care for siblings or other activities that they're engaged in. So some of the difficulty around engaging youth is just simple logistics, and those are some of the things that programs kind of have to figure out as they work with young people.
This picture here, this is April, and one of the things we're talking about in planning this is that I think we all have, and I in particular talking about this in preparation, talk to programs who just were struggling with getting kids or even convincing parents, sort of the combination, to have them sign up to get a mentor, so that they were seeing their numbers dwindle that way, where they were doing okay recruiting mentors, but they needed to find kids, which I think is sometimes an overlooked problem. But then I included the youth bus here too, because it was a lot of Rebecca Seider's research and things, but the Minneapolis Youth Coordinating Board runs a youth bus and does that. But I was also just thinking too that mentoring, especially one-to-one mentoring, kind of gets around the transportation issue by bringing the youth work to the child.
Yeah. Well, and especially in rural communities, sometimes a good van or bus is your best friend. So let's get down to the mentoring pieces of this quickly. I really see mentoring as a core way to engage youth, and as kind of a pathway to engagement is how I like to think of it. Going back to that notion that there's always a caring adult relationship at the heart of youth engagement opportunities. I think when young people are engaged with their mentor, they get more out of the program. They're able to kind of use these skills and the ways that they're growing. I think sometimes we forget that in mentoring programs. We focus so much on that inner development of the young person that we forget that a lot of times we grow best by engaging the outside world and doing something with this newfound kind of personal growth and new skills. The next slide, I just quickly, how do mentors engage youth? And obviously our panelists are going to talk much more about this, but there's a lot of research on kind of finding that right balance between having a purposefulness to the relationship, but also having that kind of just personal connection. And certainly a lot of the research of Gene Rhodes and others on the importance of giving youth voice and choice in the relationship, the importance of consistent meeting times and so forth. And as you see here, once again, I think it's critical that mentors let their young people do something with all of this kind of newfound wisdom and new skills. And then lastly, I want to just wrap up this little introduction by showing some messages that young people had said in a report by Scales and some colleagues. What did youth say about how adults could engage them? And I just encourage you to kind of look through this list here. Almost everything on this list is exactly what we tell mentors to do when we do mentor training. This looks very familiar to any of us that work in the mentoring field. And so I think, to me, this list of young people saying, here's what we need from you, to me just highlights the fact that mentoring is a really critical piece to that engagement. I know we have a bunch of great panelists for you today, so I'm just going to kind of turn this back over to Amber, and she's going to introduce our first panelist.
Great. Thanks, Mike. That was a great way to set the tone for our panelists today. It's my pleasure now to introduce Amanda Larson from the National Youth Leadership Council. She's been with the National Youth Leadership Council since 2007, and she's been working on school-based programs, professional development, and supporting youth programs. She now leads NYLC's Youth Initiatives Programming, including the work of their Youth Advisory Council and the National Youth Leadership Training. Her youth work experiences include leading after-school academic and extracurricular programs, summer residential and adventure camp experiences, and semester-long leadership development courses. Welcome, Amanda. April, do we have Amanda unmuted?
Oh, thank you. Had to have a conversation today.
Great. Hi, Amanda. Can you hear us?
Yep, I can hear you.
Wonderful. Well, welcome, and thank you for joining us on today's webinar.
Thanks. Yeah, I'm glad to be here with you.
Great. Well, could you please start by talking a bit about the National Youth Leadership Council and some of the various services you offer, and most importantly, your philosophy of engaging youth?
Sure, yeah, I can do that. I oftentimes like to talk about the National Youth Leadership Council, and starting with our program that you just mentioned, the National Youth Leadership Training. We really started as this camp-like model of youth leadership development to bring students together from across the country, supported by a mentor actually, in going through this leadership training and then going back to their home communities to take action on an issue, something that was important to them. And that mentor relationship has been key to that as well. So from that, which was nearly 30 years ago, is when that became, then NYLC became a nonprofit organization from that, and realizing that students were leaving the leadership training, going home all pumped up, excited to do something, but didn't necessarily have the adult support that they needed to carry forward with their projects. And that's really when NYLC became about service learning, which we saw a term earlier on in the screen. But so that's partly continuing to do the developing young leaders aspect of our work of direct training and work with young people, but also in supporting educators and creating that space within their classrooms or organizations or relationships of what does that look like and how do you create that space of leadership development and engagement with students. And then we also say that we advance the field by convening those who do service learning together and sharing resources and advocating for policy. But our approach to youth engagement is really around that, youth taking leadership to address issues of concern and interest to them.
That sounds great. Could you talk a little bit more about the mentoring piece and maybe talk specifically about how you utilize formal or informal mentoring programs or mentoring within your programs?
Sure, absolutely. I would say almost every training or relationship we do has some sort of a mentoring component to it, of having both adults and youth being involved in different capacities. So in one model, the National Youth Leadership Training, that leadership camp-like program that I mentioned, that we found that the mentoring piece is really integral to the success of that program. Students come together as teams or sometimes individuals, and also have an adult mentor who joins for the end of that training, so that they plan together and look at what will this look like when we go home, how do we create an action plan together, and that's been really key. We've heard from these members how important their mentor is in that relationship, to continue to coach that experience, to ask thoughtful questions, to be connecting the dots really around the learning pieces of what's going on in that experience. So semi-informal perhaps, but brought together for that intended purpose and receiving some training before really working together in that way. So that's the program that I work most closely with in that mentoring model. But even when we come in and work with a school district or with a lot of our work is within the schools, it's also informal. But we'll oftentimes have both an adult and youth component going on at the same time, so that there is that continued support after we leave, and that adult mentor plays, I would say, a coaching role in supporting the work that students are doing.
Sure. So you touched on service learning a little bit, and this was a term that I struggled with when we actually started prepping for this webinar, because I think of service learning in a very structured way. Could you talk about a little bit the difference between volunteering and service learning, and does it have to be in a class or in a curriculum, or do you find other less formal ways that can enhance that volunteer experience that maybe make it closer to service learning?
Yeah, it's a great question. It's one that's oftentimes, we do an activity oftentimes to distinguish between these terms because they're so often interchanged, and there is a little bit difference, but there's also a gray line. So we oftentimes talk about this spectrum of, if community service is on one end on the left-hand side and high quality service learning is on the other side, there's all these steps that you can take really to get from one end to the other. And the screen that's up now lists the 8 K-12 service learning standards for quality practice, and usually I am referencing some of these in terms of once you start really engaging more youth voice, more reflection, is when you move down the spectrum towards the right, towards more high quality service learning. And you can see youth voice, particularly highlighted, is one aspect that that helps take it in that direction. And it happens definitely in both formal and informal settings. A lot of our work is within schools, but it doesn't only exist there. Sometimes it's easier to do out of a school setting. It's I think some pieces to think about is having some clear learning goals, not necessarily connected to a curriculum, but what is coming out of that experience, what is the deeper root issues that we're looking at. And then also you'll see the service learning cycle that's on the screen now really goes through this process when you're doing service learning. So it says academic goals in that first step, but it doesn't need to be, like I said, it doesn't need to be specific curricular goals, just more what do we want to learn and take away from this experience. That's great. I love the visuals that are coming along with it. And also identifying that genuine need, and genuine need means not just it's for the community, it's for the youth, it's for the partners. It's a genuine need for all involved. And throughout this whole process, you'll see that the pre-service part is the biggest part of the cycle of really thinking about what does this work look like, how do we develop ownership and interest in whatever project they're going to do, and then their service and post-service of evaluating and thinking about the experience. But it's all, I know we're loving the visuals here, but that can happen both in a school setting and outside of a school setting. It's just really taking the opportunity to reflect and take in the lessons learned from that experience.
That's great. Very helpful. Your slides were great in April. I appreciate the visuals as well. One final question, Amanda, before we move on to Libby. And since the majority of our participants today come from mentoring programs, how would you recommend that mentoring programs introduce either youth voice or service learning to their adult to youth mentoring matches?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, part of it, and this is known as just a quick shift in language, even from a youth or an adult to youth or adult for youth relationship to one of working with youth, which that becomes the Minnesota Alliance with Youth, and I've heard that with is pretty intentional. That working together along that partnership, and so that's part of it. And with that becomes a give and take a little bit, a balance in allowing and providing space for students to create or to have choice and voice, which you mentioned earlier, in what that relationship is about and what they're going to do together. It's about using the skills like you mentioned and putting those into practice. About generating ideas during all stages of the process, about being part of decision making, about even evaluating the quality of the experience. So looking at perhaps the mentoring relationship itself and having a space to say, is this meeting the goals that we set out to meet? How can we improve this relationship or strengthen the work that we're doing together? And then with the screen that you see on there now, it's, like I said, it's a balance between over controlling and really not offering opportunities for students to being way on the other end of not wanting to give youth complete reign. There's still more of that partnership within there to be able to work through things together, to continue to coach throughout the process, and to create some structure around that relationship.
Great. Thank you, Amanda. And Amanda will continue to be with us throughout the rest of the webinar, and we will have some additional time at the end for questions. But I want to move on and introduce our next panelist and make sure you get a chance to hear from her as well. It's my pleasure to introduce Libby Rao from Youth Prize and the Minnesota Alliance with Youth. Hi, Libby.
Hello.
Libby develops statewide infrastructure for youth engagement in public policy and philanthropy. And her job is a creative arrangement to ensure youth leadership in Youth Prize, and she also works half-time with the Minnesota Youth Alliance. So really exciting role that you have in Minnesota, Libby, and thank you for joining us. Would you mind just kind of kicking us off and talking a bit about your title and the role that you play within these two great organizations in Minnesota?
Absolutely, thank you. Yeah, my title is Youth Engagement Strategist for both Youth Prize and the Minnesota Alliance with Youth. And this is a really interesting collaboration between two youth-serving organizations that have a statewide focus. So I have one position description, but it's a cost-shared position in terms of salary and time. And we really came to this as a way to have some collective impact around supporting, promoting, doing some research and sharing best practices around youth engagement throughout the state. Our goal for this position is really to leverage our resources, and we thought, what creative and innovative way could we do that the best? And we thought by sharing staff, and by sharing staff time, where we can really bridge the two organizations who are working towards that same common goal. And so it's a pilot. We're considering my position a pilot position. I've been in this role since about August, and really working towards a model of authentic partnership. And again, to build that kind of cross-collaboration around two organizations who have the same goals and same invested interests in engaging Minnesota youth throughout the state. So specifically, I was going to talk a little bit more about Youth Prize. Would you like me to do that as well, or?
Yes, absolutely.
So as I mentioned, my position is in partnership with the Minnesota Alliance with Youth, which is an organization that is a true alliance throughout the state that provides resource around youth engagement, academic success, and working within the schools and out of school time through an AmeriCorps Promise Fellow program. And so we came to this partnership very intentionally with the Alliance and Youth Prize. Youth Prize is a brand new organization. We've been in operation. We kicked off and kind of launched. We joked that we actually became open for business in January of this year. And our goals for the organization are really to mobilize the power of young people, really looking at effective programs that are happening throughout the state. How can we share those and replicate those? Our goal as an organization is really to expand access to quality learning experiences for young people, whether that's formal, informal, or non-formal learning environments. But where we really are focusing on is that out-of-school time, or that learning beyond the classroom piece. And again, expanding that access so that all young people and families have the opportunity to participate. Another goal of ours is really to advance integrated community-based systems. We realize that there are city systems, school systems, community systems all across the board that are really working with, for, and behalf of young people. And one of our goals is really to strengthen those systems and to build them with youth at the center. Another goal of ours is to leverage and grow resources. We're really looking at the opportunity gap. And engaging specifically, we want all Minnesota youth to thrive, but we specifically are targeting those that are often underserved and underengaged. And our final goal is really to ignite public insistence. We really want to be talking about quality learning opportunities for youth. We want this to be in the forefront when mayors are running their city council meetings. We want it to be part of the discussions when superintendents are making decisions. And so how do we build that excitement and energy to really put youth at the forefront? So Youth Prize is an interesting organization. We're considered an intermediary. We are a funder, and we also house the Minnesota Statewide After School Alliance. And it's through this that, and I'll talk a little bit about kind of our role in each of those. But as an intermediary, we do a couple different things. We look at ourselves, sometimes we describe ourselves as a big hyphen throughout the state. So we're looking at trying to connect cities and communities, funders to each other, youth-serving organizations, and youth themselves. And we really try to do that through providing research and development, some education and training, providing tools and assessment tools to really strengthen that quality and, again, increase that access, and really help and assist in ways that we can help develop the infrastructure and share resources with like programs. So that's kind of our role as an intermediary. As a funder, we really value youth engagement on all levels of our organization. And so we do provide funding for out-of-school time programming, which includes the distribution of grants. We are looking at our financial investment differently than in the traditional sense of grant giving, but also in strategic partnerships. And how can we really build partnerships like the position that I currently hold as well, but also being really strategic in building those systems and building those partnerships across sectors. Those that are doing mentoring programs, how can we connect mentoring programs with maybe very strong academic achievement programs that are working on grades and out of school or in-school retention time. So looking at partnerships kind of in a really broad sense. And then also really as a funder, looking at how can we influence the grant making with other funders in this area. So we know that throughout the state of Minnesota and nationwide, there's a whole network of funders who are supporting youth engagement and youth development on a broad level. And so how can we also not just lift up the work of our programs, but also really be strategic with the other funders. So as an intermediary and as a funder, and then we also house the Minnesota Statewide After School Alliance. Youth Prize merged with Youth Community Connections, which was an organization that was housed at the University of Minnesota and has a long history of working in policy and building learning communities and also convening and networking. And so we've incorporated that work as well. So as an intermediary, we get to do a little bit more than just the grant making. We get to be involved in kind of all levels of this youth engagement work and these initiatives throughout the state. And in order to do this, we were funded and founded by the McKnight Foundation, who really supports these goals and is part of our history as we move forward and how can we do things differently and how can we do things better. And so they had spent about a year designing Youth Prize as an organization to help us do that throughout the state. So that's a little bit about Youth Prize.
Fantastic, Libby. I have a long list of questions and could spend probably an hour just chatting with you about the great organizations that you oversee. I'm hoping maybe we can get back to some of these questions with you at the end, but want to make sure we have a chance to hear from a couple additional panelists before we get to that point. So if you don't mind, I'm going to pass it over to Mike Geringer, and he's going to introduce our next two panelists. Thank you, Libby.
Yeah, thanks, Amber. You know, when thinking about who to kind of invite to be a panelist on this today, there was one organization that I've had the privilege of working with for the past few years, and that's Youth Build USA. And specifically, they've, over the last few years, introduced mentoring to what was already an extremely robust kind of youth development model that they've got. And today we're joined by Tommy McClam, who's the mentoring program manager at Youth Build USA at their national office. He oversees the mentoring initiative there, among a few other things. And we're also joined by David Durand, who is one of the mentoring and leadership coordinators at the Century Center for Economic Opportunity Youth Build in Lenox, California. Welcome, guys. How are you?
Doing fine, Mike. How are you?
Doing well, doing well.
Good. All right, thanks for joining us. Tommy, I'm going to start with you real quick. Just, you know, for folks that may not be familiar with Youth Build, they may have heard the name before, could you just talk a little bit about kind of what Youth Build provides young people, and, you know, engagement is a huge piece of what you do. So just talk a little bit about the philosophy you guys have about how to engage young people.
All right, Mike. First of all, I'll kind of give you kind of a little background that Youth Build basically work with kind of low-income young people, ages 16 to 24, and what we do, we engage them for a period of it could anywhere from 6 months to 24 months, and the ultimate goal is that when they leave with a the minimum would be a GED or high school diploma. During the time they're working with us, they learn a job skill, and in most cases, it's centered around the area of construction, and it's actually building affordable housing in their own communities. And so we have our core, our core components, and the core components of Youth Build is basically centered around engaging the youth through leadership, through education, and then we have graduate resources. And once they leave Youth Build, there's still other resources that they can still draw upon as they continue to transition to the next phase of life. And then also while they're there, there's counseling services and construction. It's because of the basically the type of young people that we have coming in. The young people that we actually have come in, they could be adjudicated, they could be coming homeless, they could be. It sounds like we're somewhere near LAX, but it could be coming with educational needs, and also they could even age out of foster care. So kind of the core of what YouthBuild does is it engages young people, but it engages young people so they would go back and also infuse that same those leadership qualities or whatever they've learned. It will go right back into their communities. The ultimate goal is when they exit, we would like for them to enter either college or job, or in some cases both. And currently, YouthBuild is throughout the country. We have about 270 plus YouthBuild programs throughout the 45 states, and then we also have that includes DC and also the Virgin Islands.
Great, thanks, Tommy. You guys have been doing all of you mentioned all these components. There's the construction and job skills piece, there's the classroom piece, there's all this leadership and kind of a lot of service projects. But up until recently, YouthBuild sites typically didn't do mentoring using community volunteers, and that's something that you've been able to add in the last few years. Could you talk a little bit about why YouthBuild USA really wanted to add that mentoring piece and what you think it brings to the program in terms of engaging young people?
I think it kind of fits right hand in hand with what YouthBuild does as far as engaging the community, because in addition to just like not just engaging young people, but engaging the community. Because if you take a young person who comes out of a community, or take anyone who comes out of a community, if it's a great community, I'm going to feel great about myself because I come from a great community. But and vice versa, if it's a community that I'm not happy with, then I start to feel that same way about myself. So what YouthBuild has done is taking a young person and beginning to engage them in their own personal lives, moving them through the core components of YouthBuild, but also using them to engage the community. So we thought, if they're engaging the community, then how do we get the community also involved in the lives of young people? So that's where mentoring comes in, and we actually use the community as a kind of an extra staff person or a long arm that follows the young person after they've completed the YouthBuild experience. So our YouthBuild program currently, the YouthBuild mentoring program, covers a young person for 15 months. Even though the young person may only be in the program for 6 to 8 months and then actually graduate the program, that mentor still walks with them the additional months. It takes them up to 15 months. And in most cases, after 15 months, we're finding that our mentors are sticking with them almost for a lifetime.
Excellent. Yeah, no, one of the things that I think is really intriguing about the YouthBuild mentoring model is what you just mentioned, the fact that mentoring is just as much a post-program support piece as it is something that gets young people engaged with the traditional YouthBuild program itself. And I really like the fact that you're kind of using mentoring to extend the impact of the program. One of the things that I know you guys have kind of changed in the last year is something that I think you were finding early on, that some of the matches were having a little trouble getting engaged, and that young people were a little reluctant to perhaps buy into the mentoring aspect of the program. Mentors were a little uncomfortable about it, and so you guys went to kind of now a blended group one-on-one model. Could you tell folks a little bit about that change and kind of what it means in terms of getting matches engaged with each other?
Yeah, Mike, we knew that with mentoring, that young people would be more, just by having mentoring, the statistics tells us that they'll be more engaged in the program and they'll have more access to other resources. We understood that, and also as far as we knew that it would help in the transition from YouthBuild to post-secondary education or even their career. But one of the things we found that we did a needs assessment, and Kelly Bramonti, one of our program advisors, who actually came in and did a bang-up job on the needs assessment, and that needs assessment went through and looked at our sites, and we started asking some questions, and we found that the sites that were actually had started some sort of group mentoring on the front end prior to, but the population of young people we were dealing with fared a little bit better than the programs that did not, who jumped right into one-on-one mentoring. So what we did was we looked at our logic model, and we adjusted our logic model to include 3 months of group mentoring on the front end. Because the word we kept hearing from the young people and also the mentors was that there was a lack of trust. And I think a lot of it is because of the population we were dealing with. That population had been in situations where they had basically just built up a sense of mistrust for adults. And so the 3-month group period allows for the mentor to show up on a 3-month for 3 months in a group setting. The young person gets to know the mentor and also see that the mentor is legit as far as showing up and interested in them as an individual. And then after doing that 3-month period, we kind of call it our match period. Then what we do is we actually are formed a one-on-one match during the 3-month period, and then from that point on, we have 12 months of one-on-one matches where they actually they do things in the community, and they could do anything from working together, planting flowers at a nursing home, or it could just be something as simple as going out together and cleaning up the community park.
Yep, excellent. Yeah, no, I think that move to kind of that hybrid group one-on-one model was really important, as you mentioned, with your population of young people. You know, you're serving youth, 16 and sometimes all the way up to 24. And I think that's just really critical for that older population. We talked earlier about there's this kind of, if we go back to that rings of engagement, there's that arrow of relationships running through the middle, but those relationships don't start off, as fully formed and trusting relationships. And, I think one of the ways you can think about that arrow is the arrow of time a little bit. Sometimes it takes a while to get young people kind of into what the program's all about and what this stranger from the community is coming in, getting to trust them.
Mike, one of the pieces I saw, even when we were talking about the rings of engagement, is that the voice of the young people. And even in this, in changing the model was changed based upon input that was received not only from mentors, but input that we basically, it was the core of it was the input we received from the young people around trust. And that helped change the model. So in engaging the young people, we had to have their voice involved in order to make sure that we were giving them what they're asking for, but also what they need at that time.
Excellent point, Tommy. Yeah, if you're not listening to the feedback from the youth you serve, it's tough to argue that you're a youth engagement program. I want to turn things over to David now to get kind of a flavor of what this looks like in action at the local site level. David, I know you really emphasize youth engagement at your site, so if you could talk a little bit about some of the methods you try and do as a staff there to get young people engaged with your program.
Yeah, definitely. Before I speak, I just want to apologize ahead of time for the planes going over. I am right next to LAX, so they come over every couple of minutes. Regarding youth engagement, first and most importantly, when the youth are first enrolled in the program, it's really important that the staff exhibit a positive and energetic nature with the youth. As Tommy said previously, the population we deal with has developed an mistrust for adults, and so exhibiting this supportive nature really establishes youth buy-in and their initial participation and engagement. For us, we have a somewhat of an acculturation training period which we call mental toughness, where our youth participate in physical, mental, and social skill training through teamwork and workshops. And this combined with the positive, happy, smiling staff creates a great buy-in. After this period, then we give them plenty of opportunities to demonstrate how they can be successful and to demonstrate their voice. For example, at the beginning, we have members, or we call them the students members. The youth, they're highly involved in developing program policy and rules. We don't want them to feel that we're enforcing anything that they don't agree with. So there's we delve into deep conversation about how we want our program to look and have them come up with this vision. In addition, we give them a significant role in planning activities and projects. So we actually brainstorm and ask them what kind of things they want to see and what they want to do, and then give them an active role in organizing and managing those events. So this leadership development is, as Tommy was saying, is a key role, and through that lens and through those opportunities, youth have shown to be really engaged.
Great, thanks, David. So you're one of the sites participating in the pilot of the mentoring initiative, the Youth Build. Could you talk a little bit about how you tried to kind of get young people engaged with the idea of having a mentor? I know sometimes it's a bit of a tough sell.
Yeah.
What did you guys do as a staff to get them on board?
Well, like I said before, establishing that trust and that relationship with the youth beforehand, before even mentioning the mentor program, is critical, because then they know that what we have to offer is of benefit. So what I do with them is I don't throw the whole program at them all at once, all the information, all the requirements and commitments. It's a step-by-step process. I first invite them to an info session. And in that info session, we talk and go over some of the general ideas and goals of the program and how it could be of benefit to the youth and to the mentors that they would have. If a youth is not interested after this initial information session, I definitely would have a one-on-one conversation with them to go into detail more about where their motivations are and what they're trying to do with themselves, to try to convince them that this might be an opportunity. And sometimes this works, you know, offering that maybe if they just come to what, as Tommy was explaining before, the group sessions, just to experience one group session and to see what that's like. So once following this step-by-step process of taking each step one at a time, they don't feel overwhelmed. And the group activities have actually shown to work out well, and they see that, you know, there is a benefit to the program, and that it's not something to be feared or something that doesn't apply to them.
Sure, sure.
Yeah. And if I can make one more point, especially
Sure.
if they get to the point of engaging in a one-on-one match, at any point during the 15 months that they're involved in the program, I give them the option of leaving. That this is not something that's set in stone. If at any point you don't feel comfortable and you want to stop, you definitely can. Of course, that wouldn't happen without some conversation, but the least amount of pressure and anxiety as possible has shown to prove some good results.
That's a good point, David. Thanks for adding that. You know, it's interesting. I think in this conversation we talk a lot about, like, how are we going to engage youth? How are we going to get, you know, them hooked on what we're offering? But going back to that importance of the adult relationship at the center, we haven't talked much today about how do we prepare adults, especially mentors who aren't probably coming from a youth development background. How do we prepare them to be tools of engagement for young people? So do you talk just a little bit about kind of the training you give mentors around that, and how you teach them to be conduits to engagement?
Yeah, definitely. Well, first, we do work with a very specific population, and in the trainings that we try to develop the skills that we find most beneficial. For example, having mentors learn active listening skills. They would first assess themselves on their listening abilities, and then we delve into how to improve those skills, and how it's so important with our youth to demonstrate this, because our youth feel that they are not listened to and that they don't have a voice. In addition to listening, effective communication is an area that we focus on. Our youth tend to get into an emotion with certain topics, or have some communicative barriers. So we delve into how to approach those situations with the mentors during the training. And I think one of the most important areas of focus is setting boundaries. You know, I think this was mentioned before with one of the panelists, that you don't want to give too much freedom, but you don't want to have too much of a presence. And so trying to find that middle ground and setting those boundaries is definitely important. And we do this by by engaging in self-assessments, as I said, and role-playing workshops and dialogue to try to mix up the experience and give the mentor some practice before being matched one-on-one. Also,
we have.
want to focus.
Oh, sorry. Some of our other panelists are able to jump in on that question then too. But finish up, David. Sorry, I thought I heard a pause.
Oh, okay, no worries, no worries. We also focus on the fact that I feel like mentors come in and join a program thinking that they're going to save some youth or be this superhero, and the idea is that we're not necessarily saving youth, but we're trying to empower them, and like what was said before, we're working with them, not necessarily for them or and lastly, we try to give the mentors training in how to establish a youth-led relationship. How to have the mentee lead the conversations and come up with realistic activities to do with the mentor. And this helps in bringing some comfort level into how to approach the relationship from a mentor perspective.
Great, thank you, David. Yeah, one of the things that folks may not be aware of, a lot of youth-build mentoring, the relationship really has this focus around helping the young people achieve kind of the goals that they set once they leave youth-build's doors. And so by kind of focusing on letting the youth kind of take the reins on where this goes and specifying what they need help with, I think that also helps with engagement. April, it sounded like we had other panelists that wanted to weigh in on kind of how do we prepare adults to be engagement vehicles for young people.
Yeah, this is Amanda. I was going to jump in on a couple ideas. I think what was mentioned was great, the role playing and giving opportunities to kind of add that up beforehand. We oftentimes also do a pre-evaluation, and I think in the link that was sent out earlier, lift.nylc.org, if you click on Youth Voice, there's resources specifically connected around that, and one of them is a pre-assessment for adults to think about how do they currently view their relationship with young people. So it kind of goes to categories that we mentioned earlier of working with to, for, or with youth. So it provides a conversation starter of where are your actions and views currently at, and how do you move down the spectrum. We also create opportunities. I think it works best when youth and adult are in the room together, but to bring up potential not controversial, but for what might be some of those stereotypes between youth and adults. So asking questions or making statements, I guess, like being a teenager today is different than it was 20 years ago, and seeing if people disagree or agree and we're in the middle, and seeing where a conversation starts from there. Or a comment like, youth today spend too much time using technology. And again, spurring conversation about what does that look like, what are they using it for, and addressing some of those issues that might be different between the generations. And then also I talk about spectrums, I'm realizing a lot, but a simple spectrum tool of having the word youth on one end, like on the left side of the room, and then the word adult on the other side, and asking, I guess, again, the whole group, whether it's a room full of youth and adults or just adults or just of youth, yeah, just like this, in terms of contribution or in terms of leadership, where is the appropriate balance within a relationship, and have people place a dot or stand along the line of what that looks like in terms of this relationship, and you'll see varying viewpoints come up a lot there, and again, it provides a space for conversation about, well, how do we balance these opposing viewpoints within the relationship?
Great, thank you, Amanda. I had one last question I was going to ask David, but I think I'll just throw it open to all of our panelists here. And most of our audience today is mentoring coordinators. What's the one piece of advice you would give them about how to build more youth engagement into their mentoring programs?
Well, like I was mentioning before, that staff being that energetic, smiling, happy role model is critical to that initial trust buy-in. But in terms of the youth, I feel that understanding the youth's awareness of themselves and how they view themselves in society is a great indicator of how you can provide them a specific tailored engagement plan or life plan, as we like to call it here, that best fits their personality and interests.
Great.
Mike, this is Tommy. One of the pieces that and David alluded to is that we use the life plan, and the life plan is kind of a tool that we use where the young person actually writes down what their goals are. And so in the mentoring relationship is centered around that life plan, so it's the youth's voice that becomes the primary motivator, and not a lot of times what the adult wants for the youth. But the youth kind of looks at where they want to go, and that adult comes in and follows their life plan, and that helps them in things that they do outside of outside of the program area, but also in the mentoring one-on-one relationship.
And this is Amanda. I think this is alluded to earlier in one of the models, but the way that NYLC does it as well, and I know that the Alliance does, is have an actual youth council that works alongside us in developing programs and advising work. And so having some sort of a leadership group, maybe that comes out of a mentoring program, who can help inform really the process and what that looks like and how to move forward, get that initial buy-in, but also those ideas of on the ground, what's working, what's not, and how do we adjust accordingly.
Yeah, this is Libby, and I think to echo that as well, I mean, one thing that we really are mindful of, that youth engagement happens with youth, not for youth, or that we really focus on that with piece and engaging them in the conversation on what makes the most sense for them. And again, as the other panelists had alluded to in terms of those goal settings and kind of setting those agreements, but having them be part of it from the very beginning is essential for the way that we work as well. And as Amanda had also mentioned, with our youth councils and our advisory boards, really including them in all decisions that we make as organizations, but as they make with their adult partners as well. And so really focusing, there's I know we had, the organizers had mentioned YCB as a program here in the cities, and their motto is, from the young people, they say, no decision about us without us. And so it's a subtle reminder to include them in all processes of it. So while we're thinking about how to engage young people, we always say that they're the best resources, so we should ask them first, and then really start to build out what that can look like from that starting point.
Great, excellent point there, Libby. You know, I was at a conference last year where there was a mentoring program serving foster youth, and obviously foster youth bring a lot of often negative feelings about adults to the table, and their program motto is nothing about me without me, and I just think that's a really critical phrase and a critical mindset for getting young people engaged. Amber, I know we're kind of short on time here. I don't know if we have any questions from the audience or our participants today.
We do. This is Sarah from Friends for Youth. We do have a couple questions that I'd like to get to, and these are open to anyone on the panel. I'll throw a couple out. Katie was wondering how to make the program more attractive when they have a really small number of attendees, so how do you bring in more people? And Tina was wondering how long does it take to develop, I think she was referring to the Youth Build program, because it's based on a lot of staff and mentor relationships. So how long do you really need to bring this in? And then lastly, Major was asking about tools to engage system-involved youth with any of these kinds of programs.
Well, this is Tommy. I'll start with the questions surrounding Youth Build, basically how long it takes. Just kind of give you a little background on the Youth Build program. We're currently in our about 2 years old as far as mentoring goes. The Youth Build program itself has been around a number of years. But what we're at now is infusing mentoring into an existing program. And we just now being at the 2-year mark, I think we're actually starting to make major headway, because now it's infusing into the actual, every program has its silos, and we're beginning to become a part of what's actually occurring in the various programs, and mentoring now has a place at the table. So from the programmatic side, I would say it probably takes anywhere from, I'd say from 12 to 18 months before it actually becomes, mentoring will become actually part of the fabric of your program.
If I could just speak to ways to engage youth, one thing that we found successful is bringing in previous relationships, previous mentor and mentee match, to speak on their experience and what they got from it, and answer any questions that the potential youth might have. And also pizza, food always brings people to participate in activities.
Yeah, we talk about a lot of different pieces of why ultimately do young people come to the table, and yeah, food is part of it. Food, fun, relationships, and having that meaningful work. So I think in similar ways of oftentimes I think the students who participate in your programs are the best ambassadors for the program themselves. So having them come on board or come alongside you to talk about what they're gaining from it or why be involved, having them be either alongside an adult or in their schools or wherever they are talking about it is really the most beneficial way, I think, to get others involved.
Yeah, and this is Libby, and I was going to echo Amanda and say that as well. Our biggest recruitment tool that we have are the young people themselves, and so we use a lot of social media, and but we ask the young people to do it because they have the stories, they have the experience. They can tell our story way better than we can around programs and around their experiences. And so again, kind of going back to the earlier points as well, but we really look at our best recruitment tool is the young people themselves, and they can speak on behalf of it and share their testimonies in a way that we can't, and so we look to them as well. So.
Okay, great. Well, thanks,
Okay,
everybody.
we have one last question, if I can throw that in, Michael.
Sure.
There was a resource discussed by Amanda, Matthew Thinking, where you discussed a pretest for adults to examine their relationship with young people. Can you reference that again, please?
Sure, yeah. The tool is available on a multimedia tool called LIFT, and it's lift.nylc.org, and that is a multimedia kind of website. Here's a picture of it. As you go there, this is a really resource that looks at service learning in practice. So those 8 quality service learning standards that I mentioned, youth voice, reflection, meaningful service, sometimes it's hard to know what that means and looks like in practice, and this website, if you go to there, really shows you what it looks like in action. So it follows 3 schools who are doing high-quality service learning, interviews their teachers, their students, shows their projects in action, and then also has downloadable resources to take those lessons into your own work. And so the specific resource that I mentioned, if you go to this website, is click on Youth Voice, that you see along the bottom there. Yep, that was scrolled over. And then there's 2 sections then once you go in there, and the second one is Explore Youth Voice. And if you go into Explore Youth Voice, there's some downloadable tools. One of them is that pre-evaluation tool that I mentioned.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, well, great. I think we're just about out of time here, so I think I'm going to throw things back to April and Amber, and they'll get us home.
Great. Thanks, Mike. And a big thank you to all of our panelists today. I certainly wish we had more time because I think we could have spent an hour talking with each panelist. But once again, we do have ways to continue the conversation once we wrap up today's webinar on the mentoring forums and through Twitter. So April, I think we have a couple slides to kind of close things out. There we are. Just
Hi.
Go ahead.
I know. I just have to apologize for the. I don't know if the numbers on my keyboard are not lining up, but I've been having all kinds of technical difficulties with slides, so I apologize to everybody. Here we go.
No problem. Well, just a couple of things before we wrap up today. As I mentioned at the beginning of the webinar, you will be receiving an email after this webinar that talks about how you can download the slides and a recording of the webinar. It will also provide you a link to the mentoring forums so you can continue this conversation. And please help us plan for future webinars by briefly taking the short survey we'll be sending to you as well. And we are in the process of planning future webinars, and we have one planned for May 17th, and this is going to be around mentoring youth for STEM careers. So a great topic and one that we know is a hot issue with mentoring programs. So please register for that one and watch for our upcoming webinars as well. Our plan is to offer one per month with all of the partners kind of taking a turn and leading the webinars. So with that, we thank you for participating today. April will be showing one more slide that does provide our contact information if you're interested in getting in touch with us about these webinars. We thank you for your participation, and thank you to all of the partners that helped make this webinar possible. And most importantly, thank you to all of our great panelists today, Tommy and David, Amanda and Libby. Thank you so much, and look forward to seeing all of you on a future webinar. Have a good afternoon, everybody.
All right. Bye-bye.